All right, welcome in, everyone. Kicking off another deep dive here. And today, we're looking at some pretty interesting stuff
Yeah,
that you sent our way.
absolutely.
You really got us thinking with these legal documents. You got us wondering if there's
Mhm.
like a commercial side to the U.S. legal system,
Yeah.
kind of hidden in plain sight
Yeah.
based on how some of these laws and definitions are written.
Right, right.
And of course, the big question is, what does all this mean for you and me, for everyday people?
Exactly.
So really appreciate you sending these sources in.
Yeah, this is a really fascinating set of stuff you found straight from the U.S. Code and the Code of Federal Regulations.
Right, the real deal. And
Yeah.
that's what we like to dive into here.
Absolutely.
So our mission today is to unpack some of these legal codes,
Mm-hmm.
look at how they're worded,
Yeah.
and look at how some folks are interpreting them.
Right.
We want to help you understand the different arguments out there
Mm-hmm.
without, taking sides ourselves.
Exactly. We're not here to advocate. We're just here to explore.
Exactly. Just explore.
Yeah.
And I think a really interesting place to start is with this idea from your sources.
Yeah.
Have you ever thought about the fact that the U.S. government
Mm-hmm.
is sometimes defined legally as a federal corporation?
That's right. This federal corporation concept, pretty wild, right?
Yeah.
So your sources pointed us to this statute, 28 USC section 3215.
Okay.
Now, this is part of the Federal Debt Collection Procedures Act,
Okay.
and it defines United States in a way that includes this term, federal corporation.
So specifically when they're trying to get money back,
Yes, exactly.
the government is using a definition
Right.
that includes this federal corporation idea.
It's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is.
What does that tell us about how that whole interaction works?
Yeah, what's going on there?
Well, one way to look at it is that when the government's collecting a debt,
Mm-hmm.
they're acting like a corporation.
Like a business.
Yeah, like a business. They make contracts, handle assets, and importantly, they go after unpaid debts.
Right.
So basically, when they're chasing that debt, they're not acting like the all-powerful government anymore. They're like a regular company.
Interesting.
It's a subtle change, but it could mean a lot in terms of power dynamics.
Yeah, makes you think about it differently, doesn't it?
It does.
So, listener, what comes to mind when you hear federal corporation
Yeah.
used to describe the U.S. government? Does that change how you see things?
It definitely makes you reevaluate the relationship a bit, right?
Sure. And this leads us to another interesting point from your sources.
Okay.
It's the definition of United States business.
Mm-hmm.
And we found this in 15 U.S.C. section 4724.
Right. And this one relates to trade and the Export Enhancement Act.
Okay.
And this definition is pretty broad.
Yeah, and this is where it gets really interesting for us as individuals.
Absolutely.
Because if I'm reading this right, this definition of United States business actually includes...
To touch normal people like you and me, citizens.
That's exactly right.
Wow.
The actual wording of 15 U.S.C. 4-724 says,
Okay.
the term United States businesses means a United States citizen.
So under this law, anyone who's a U.S. citizen is
Yeah.
also considered a United States business.
At least for the purpose of this particular law.
Right, right.
So it's like they're blurring the line between a regular person and a company.
It really makes you wonder, what does it mean for a person to be defined as a business?
Yeah. What are the implications of that?
Even if it's just in this one specific area of law.
Right. Is this a one-off thing, or is there something bigger going on?
Makes you think.
It really does.
So listener, what do you think? Does it surprise you that a U.S. citizen can be called a United States business legally? What do you think the reason for that could be?
Maybe it's to help individual exporters get the same benefits as big companies, but it's still pretty thought-provoking when you think about legal definitions and how they could be used. It is. Okay, so let's shift gears a little and talk about owing money to the government.
All right.
Your sources brought up some interesting stuff in the Social Security Administration's regulations, specifically 20 CFR, section 422.405,
Okay.
and some related sections about getting debts paid back through what's called administrative wage garnishment.
Yeah, that's where they can basically take money right out of your paycheck.
Right.
To cover a debt.
And the language they use in these regulations is really interesting.
It is.
It seems to set up a very specific relationship between the government and the individual.
Right, and section 422.405 is all about the process of notifying someone before they garnish their wages.
Right, the rules around it.
Yeah, the rules, but the important part is how they define you in all this. You means an individual who owes a debt to the United States.
So if you owe the government money, like if you got overpaid on Social Security benefits or something,
Exactly.
then you are considered a debtor to the U.S. government.
That's right.
It's like they're treating it like a business transaction
Yeah, very much a creditor-debtor relationship.
instead of a criminal issue or something.
Right.
And they have the power to just take money from your paycheck to get that debt paid.
It's a pretty powerful administrative process.
It is. Makes you wonder how people feel about that.
Yeah. How does that strike you, listener? Does it feel like normal government action or more like a company collecting a debt?
It's definitely something to think about. All right, let's keep exploring this theme of different types of legal violations.
Okay.
Let's talk about the definition of a crime.
All right.
You mentioned Georgia law, OCGA section 1621,
Mm-hmm.
and some general legal principles about what makes something a crime.
Yeah.
And it seems like intent is a big part of it.
It really is.
When we think of a crime, we think of someone doing something wrong on purpose.
Right.
And legally, that intent often determines whether something is actually a crime.
Absolutely.
That's the classic definition.
Yep, you need both the bad action and the guilty mind.
Right, like they did something bad and they meant to do it.
And Georgia law says a crime is a violation of a statute of this state in which there is a joint operation of an act or omission to act, an intention or criminal negligence.
So, got to have that action that breaks the law,
Mm.
plus some level of bad intent or carelessness.
Right.
But then you've got all these other situations like traffic tickets or fines for breaking some small regulation.
Yeah, things like that.
Those can come with penalties too, like fines, even if you didn't mean to break any rules,
That's true.
like accidentally parking in the wrong spot or forgetting to file a form on time.
Happens all the time.
In those cases, they don't really care if you meant to do it or not.
Right. They just care that you broke the rule.
And this is where it gets interesting.
Okay.
If you get fined for something you didn't do on purpose,
Mm-hmm.
does that feel like you're being punished for a crime?
Right.
Or does it feel more like you're paying a fee for not following the rules?
Like a penalty.
It doesn't feel the same as being accused of, like, stealing or hurting someone.
It's a different kind of consequence.
And that difference between things you do intentionally and things you don't
Mm-hmm.
is one of the things that leads to this bigger interpretation,
Okay.
that maybe the whole system have a commercial side to it,
That's one of the arguments, yeah.
that there are connections between the legal system, this thing called admiralty law,
Right.
and how debts get collected.
Yeah, that whole system.
And admiralty law, that's old school maritime law, right?
Yeah, it's about ships and commerce and stuff.
And in that system, a lot of disputes are treated like broken contracts or unpaid debts.
Mm-hmm.
It's not so much about criminal intent.
More about obligations.
Exactly.
And
Obligations.
some people see parallels to that in our current system.
Okay, so let's try to sum all this up.
Right.
We've seen how the U.S. can be called a federal corporation when it comes to collecting debts,
Mm.
how citizens can be considered businesses under certain laws,
Right.
how the government sometimes acts like a creditor,
Yeah.
and how crimes usually require intent.
It's a lot to unpack.
It is.
Yeah.
But what's the big takeaway here? What are people saying about all this?
Well, one interpretation is that all these pieces together suggest that our legal system, especially the part with all the written laws and regulations.
Right, the statutory system.
Yeah, that system has a commercial side to it.
Like it's based on business principles.
Exactly.
So instead of always being about justice and intent,
Mhm.
it's also about,
Obligations.
obligations and enforcing them.
And those financial penalties, like fines, are a big part of that enforcement.
So maybe the relationship between the government and the individual
Mm.
isn't always about crime and punishment,
Right. It can be more like a business deal sometimes.
with potential debts and responsibilities.
Exactly. And when you end up in court for a fine or something,
Hmm?
some people say the judge is acting more like a business referee than a traditional judge.
Wow, that's a different way to look at it.
It is, isn't it?
Yeah. So putting it all together, the government as a corporation, citizens as businesses,
Mm-hmm.
the focus on collecting debts, and the importance of intent in defining crimes.
Yeah.
Does it seem like our legal system sometimes acts more like a commercial setup
Right.
than a pure justice system?
It's a question worth considering for sure.
It really is.
Yeah.
And it's important to remember this is just one interpretation.
Absolutely.
We're just looking at the legal codes and regulations that you sent us.
Right. But it's fascinating stuff.
It is. And we want you, the listener, to think about this too.
Mhm.
Look into these laws yourself and come to your own conclusions.
Exactly. Do your own research.
So here's a final thought.
Okay.
If this commercial aspect of the legal system is real, how could understanding it help you when you're dealing with the government or the courts?
Interesting question.
What other questions does this raise for you?
Yeah, where do we go from here?
We hope this deep dive has given you a new perspective on our legal system.
It's complex stuff.
It is. But keep exploring. Keep asking questions.
Absolutely.
Thanks for joining us today,
Thanks, everyone.
and we'll see you next time.